Rice Park is St. Paul's oldest and one of the area's finest urban parks. It is even 7 years older than New York's famous Central Park. It was designated a public square in 1849 by John R. Irvine, a territorial pioneer, and Henry M. Rice, a territorial delegate and United States Senator after Minnesota achieved statehood. Rice, for whom the park is named, was a native of Vermont who arrived at Fort Snelling in 1839. He was a rather remarkable man who, in addition to the public offices he held, was active in the fur trade and served as an intermediary in the treaty negotiations with the Sioux and Chippewa Indians. The early St. Paul parks were little used and were open spaces, left largely unattended. For a while, the park was used by a German immigrant who was allowed to cultivate flowers and vegetables there in return for caring for the land. Cows were a real problem as they kept wandering into the park to graze. Neighborhood women used the grassy area to clean their laundry in the sun, and on cleaning days could be found beating their rugs. Neither the mayor nor the chief of police was able to dissuade them from these practices until a law was passed prohibiting such activities. In 1860, Mayor John S. Price procured shade trees to enhance the grounds. These trees were planted by the chief of police and his men, and there was a good deal of public speculation about their survival because of the underlying rock formation. As you can see, the trees survived. In 1872, summer evening concerts were initiated by the Western Band. During this year, the park was visited by the chief of police of Memphis, Tennessee. A year later, a pair of caged squirrels arrived with compliments of the chief as a gesture of goodwill. Circuses erected their tents in the park, concerts were held, and many 4th of Julys were celebrated here. Nothing, however, could compare to the grand opening of the Northern Pacific Railroad, which was celebrated in this park on September 3, 1883. The 21st President of the United States, Chester Alan Arthur, attended the festivities with his party, along with others such as former U.S. President Grant, Minnesota Governor Lucius Hubbard, former Governor Alexander Ramsey, and the railroad's founder James J. Hill. All were guests of Henry Villard, President of the Northern Pacific Railroad. At Rice Park, on that morning, was a gem of trees and flowers. Many of the honored guests were seated to review a great parade. The whole city was bedecked with wreaths, flags, arches made of green branches and flowers, and huge banners proclaimed such sentiments: "Hurrah for the men to whom we owe the Northern Pacific," or "Hail President Villard." It was indeed a memorable day for St. Paul. In 1965, Hamel Gren and Abrahamson designed the landscape for Rice Park and replaced a sculptured figure which had stood in the fountain since 1925. The Women's Institute of St. Paul helped to raise funds for the new sculpture, which was a height of 7.5 feet and is titled The Source. It represents the source of the rivers and perhaps that of life itself. The rim of the fountain was expanded at this time to give the appearance of an amphitheater. In 1985, the streets surrounding the park were resurfaced with brick. Today, Rice Park is still a favorite of many St. Paulites who come simply to enjoy the lovely setting with its trees, flowers, and fountains surrounded by some of the city's most magnificent buildings, or to take advantage of the many enjoyable entertainments which are offered here throughout the year. In 2019, the park underwent a multi-million-dollar renovation to improve the walkways, lighting, and landscaping. The project was a team effort spearheaded by the Rice Park Association, the St. Paul Garden Club, St. Paul Parks Conservancy, and the City of St. Paul. Now looking to the east, you will see the Hotel St. Paul, now referred to as the St. Paul Hotel. In 1910, when the federal courts building across the street, now called Landmark Center, was only 8 years old, its neighbor, the St. Paul Hotel, opened its doors. The St. Paul is the oldest grand hotel in the city. Much of the city's political and social life revolved around the hotel from its beginning. It was a place where many politicians, legislators, lobbyists, businessmen, farmers, judges, and newspapermen stood next to each other at the curved wooden bar of the Gopher Grill discussing the day's events. It was also a gathering place for celebrities, millionaires, and world leaders. President Taft, T. Roosevelt Coolidge, and Wilson graced the hotel, and Hollywood icons such as Carol Burnett and many others provided the glamour. It all began when the hotel's predecessors, the prestigious Windsor Hotel, built in 1877, and the Ryan Hotel, built in 1885, could no longer meet the demands of a growing city. St. Paul businessman Lucius P. Ordway bought the Windsor property in 1908 and announced that he would help finance the construction of a modern hotel on the site. The new hotel was designed by Reed and Stem, the same architects of the St. Paul Auditorium and the Grand Central Station in New York City. The 12-story structure, built on brick and terracotta tile at a cost of $1.3 million, is generally described as modified Italian Renaissance in style. On April 18, 1910, the Hotel St. Paul opened. 6,000 American Beauty roses adorn the walls and the lobby and dining room. 500 civic leaders attended an extravagant 11-course dinner where the future Supreme Court Justice Pierce Butler shared the Toastmasters podium with railroad magnate James J. Hill, Governor Adolph Eberhart, and Archbishop John Ireland. During the years to come, dancing was a very popular entertainment for the area's young people, and the music of foxtrots and ragtime could be heard from the casino ballroom every Saturday night throughout the 1920s. KSTP Radio, which had its headquarters on the 12th floor of the hotel from 1928 until the mid-1940s, broadcast the big bands right from the ballroom. Food was another big attraction at the St. Paul Hotel. A Sunday smorgasbord, the first in the Northwest, was introduced in 1946, where you could choose from some 52 hot dishes, 42 salads, and a variety of other foods for about $1.95 a plate. Over the years, the hotel went through a number of improvements. A ramp garage was added in 1937, and the hotel was air-conditioned, but by the mid-1960s, the once elegant hotel had slipped into obvious physical decline, with dowdy lobby furniture and worn-out carpets. Finally, in August 1979, the hotel closed. The new entrance now opens onto Market Street and Rice Park, complete with a circular drive and glass canopy amidst a beautifully landscaped area. The building standing just south of the St. Paul Hotel was the American Hoist and Derrick, or Amhoist Tower, which is now referred to as Landmark Towers. 20th century architecture is beautifully represented by Landmark Towers, which now is the home of offices and condominiums. At the main entrance, a small plaza with a fountain and statue is located. It is a statue of a man, woman, and child rising and twisting out of a red sandstone fountain, surrounded by 3 pyramids of water. In order not to overshadow the architectural harmony of Rice Park and its surroundings, it was decided to increase the height of the building gradually away from the park and recess the main tower farther towards St. Peter Street. The design has the added benefit of allowing a full view of the Hotel St. Paul with its Market Street entrance and landscaped front. Looking to the south across 4th Street, we come to the CenturyLink building, formerly Northwestern Bell. 2 years after the invention of the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell, the Northwestern Telephone Exchange Company was organized. In 1879, the construction of the telephone system of 37 customers in the city of St. Paul was undertaken. By 1880, long-distance calls could be placed to Minneapolis, Stillwater, and Fort Snelling. In 1942, Northwestern Bell took over earlier companies, and the operations expanded rapidly to a point where 1 million telephones were in service by 1956. The Northwestern Bell Telephone Building, which is one of 3 at the corner of Market Street and 4th, was designed by architect Clarence H. Johnston. The building, with its plain surfaces, strong vertical lines, set back masses, contrasting colors and textures, and polished granite from Morton, Minnesota, while the area above is constructed from Kasota stone. The material between the windows is natural aluminum, which has blackened over the years. If we head back towards the park along 4th Street and look to the south, we see the James J. Hill Reference Library, now James J. Hill Center. Professors, teachers, and scholars of this area had long suggested the establishment of a research library. Mr. Hill was approached, and in 1912 he decided to build and endow a free reference library as a gift to the city of St. Paul. In 1915, the old St. Paul Public Library was destroyed by a fire. This provided an opportunity for Mr. Hill to propose that a new public library be located next to his proposed reference library. The final result was that the two structures were planned and built as a unit under one roof, with separate entrances and separate firewall. The architect, Electus D. Litchfield of New York, was hired by James J. Hill. Litchfield had built the New York Public Library. He gave elegant and classically inspired proportions to the building. Hill died without leaving a will, leaving doubt as to whether the project would continue. The Hill heirs, however, decided to continue to fund the library. It was established as a private corporation which was governed by a board for the use of local citizens active in the business and cultural life of St. Paul. The Hill Library was conceived as a general reference library of great books in every field, with the exception of genealogy, law, and medicine, as these were extensively covered in other libraries. As time evolved, the use of the library evolved with it, as well as was the site of special events such as weddings and proms. Sadly, in July of 2019, the library closed. Right next door to the reference library is the St. Paul Public Central Library, now called the George Latimer Central Library. The library was one of the city's most significant buildings. Built on the site of St. Paul's Old Farmers Market, it occupies one city block. The exterior is of pink Tennessee marble, while the principal rooms are finished in gray Mankato stone, Kettle River sandstone. The building was designed by New York architect Electus D. Litchfield, who also designed the New York Public Library. It was a good example of the Northern Italian Renaissance revival style, which was often used for libraries at the turn of the century. The library can accommodate approximately 500,000 volumes, which are located in stacks rising from the ground floor to the roof, on the east as well as on the southwest side of the building. The library is maintained wholly by public funds and has no endowments. The library, which is a privately funded nonprofit, was met with a variety of challenges that brought the board to this very difficult decision. In November of 2019, the building was listed for sale. As of July 2020, there have been no further updates. Continuing along 4th Street, we'll cross Washington Street and arrive at the Minnesota Club, now called 317 on Washington. The Minnesota Club was modeled after the men's social clubs which sprang up in England in the 17th century. The name Minnesota Club was deliberately chosen so that the membership would not be confined to St. Paul, but to include other areas. The club's objective has been to provide an outstanding facility where leaders and persons of accomplishment from the business, professional, civic, and cultural community can gather for relaxation, interchange of ideas, and social activity. It has always been considered as one of the great social clubs in the country. The club was organized on March 9, 1869, with 75 charter members under the presidency of General Henry Hastings Sibley. Many well-known names have been connected with the club from its very beginning, such as James J. Hill, Henry M. Rice, Lucius P. Ordway, Frederick R. Bigelow, Thomas R. Irvine, and many others. The old club building stood on 4th and Cedar Streets across from the St. Paul Athletic Club. The present home of the club was completed in 1915, with an approximate budget of $300,000. It is a symmetrical composition in the Italian Renaissance recital style and was designed by Clarence Howard Johnson of Ellerbe Associates Incorporated. The wrought iron window boxes and the fold cartouche above the entrance are proper finishes for a very proper club. Cass Gilbert, architect of the Minnesota State Capitol, designed the interior furnishings. When the new building opened its doors on October 20, 1915, 700 guests appeared for supper and dancing. A number of notable portraits can be found at the club, such as Frank B. Kellogg, Nobel Prize winner, statesman, and club member, a well-known portrait of James J. Hill at the height of his success, as well as a portrait reputed to be that of Nina Clifford, St. Paul's most famous madam. Just beyond 317 on Washington, we will come to St. Paul River Center, formerly the St. Paul Civic Center. The St. Paul River Center is a multi-purpose complex divided into the oval-shaped arena built in 1973 and the Roy Wilkins Auditorium, formerly the St. Paul Auditorium. It has undergone extensive remodeling both in the 1980s and the 1990s. From hockey to international food festivals, circuses to rock concerts, the River Center provides a variety of entertainment. The Roy Wilkins Auditorium is dedicated to the member of Roy Wilkins who grew up in St. Paul and who helped to found and direct the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The complex is located at O'Shaughnessy Plaza, which carries the name of a St. Paul philanthropist. As we continue down Washington Street, we'll come to the Ordway Music Theater, now Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. The Ordway Center for the Performing Arts was completed in 1985 and was a very exciting addition to Rice Park. It houses the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, Minnesota Opera, and the Schubert Club. The Ordway itself presents a variety of dance, drama, jazz, and popular music to round out the presentations. The theater was conceived as a performing space for the Twin Cities and Minnesota at large, in which the finest artists in the musical and theatrical field are presented. It was originally designed with 2 performing halls which offered productions of classical and contemporary performances such as chamber music, opera, vocal and instrumental recitals, dance, musicals, drama, jazz, and popular music. The large theater, which seats 1,800 guests and is strongly reminiscent of European grand opera houses, is horseshoe-shaped with balconies wrapped around the rectangular space on 3 sides. The second smaller theater was torn down in 2013 and has been rebuilt into a larger concert hall that seats 1,100 guests. It serves 3 principal users, but namely the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, with other local and national foundations providing additional financial assistance. The Ordway Music Theater is named after Lucius P. Ordway, one of Minnesota's early entrepreneurs. Mr. Ordway, who was very successful in a plumbing supply business, invested $14,000 in his own considerable skills in a struggling sandpaper company located in northern Minnesota in 1905. The firm grew and prospered and eventually became 3M, the largest corporation in Minnesota and 22nd largest among the list of 500 in Fortune. As we continue down Washington Street, we come to the St. Paul Companies, now Travelers. In 1853, when the city of St. Paul was a young town of 3,000 people, St. Paul Fire and Marine was formed by 17 leading citizens. It was the era of Red River ox carts, Indian trade, and river boats, and the trade especially demanded insurance. It was important as well that the city could be protected from any losses caused by fire or marine disaster. The facade of the original building facing Rice Park was reclad in the early 1990s when the company built its new headquarter building across 6th Street. As we round the corner on Washington Street and turn back down 5th Street, we see Landmark Center. Landmark Center is a premier arts and cultural center in the heart of downtown St. Paul. Its resident organizations present a yearly calendar of public programs in the performing and visual arts. It is owned by Ramsey County and managed as a cultural center for the community by the nonprofit Minnesota Landmarks. To learn more about Landmark Center and its architecture, consider taking our virtual tour that can also be found on Landmark Center's website. Thanks for spending some time with me. I hope you enjoyed the sights that you saw of Rice Park and some of the history you learned.